member who's just resumed his speech spent 10 minutes trying to justify mining in national parks, and not once did he mention his or his government's commitment to any job creation. And that's because they haven't got any. That's because there is not an ounce in that whole member's body, not an ounce of commitment to doing anything towards addressing the fact that we now have 168,000 people in New Zealand who want to work, who get up in the morning, want to go to a job, but they haven't got a job to go to. Mr. Speaker, the other thing that member did, which I was surprised at because in the past I've heard better contributions from him, he resorted to a tactic that I don't think this Parliament should accept, and that is when you run out of decent policy debates, you attack the person. You introduce red herrings, you start mocking the opposition, and you totally avoid having a serious policy debate. And in my view, Mr. Speaker, this Parliament should be better than that. Ken Graham took exception to it on behalf of the Green Party. Well, I think every single person in the country who was listening to that speech would have taken exception to it. I have a message for Mr. Brownlee. I'm not opposed to mining. I enjoy the benefits that mining gives to us as individuals and as to our nation, despite the fact that actually the mining industry loses money in New Zealand. Most of the money goes offshore. We still have a lot of benefits and I enjoy them as well. But I am opposed to mining in precious areas of New Zealand that not only are viewed as precious, but have been designated as precious by this House. There are some parts of our country that should be kept precious because that's what they are. There is no such thing as restoration of untouched land once it has been touched. We do have rare earth minerals, but what we also have in New Zealand are places of rare beauty. And when those two coincide, we have a moral responsibility to ensure that the rare beauty is protected for future generations. That's the message that I want Mr. Brownlee to hear. Mr. Speaker, the message that the public of New Zealand wanted to hear on Big Tuesday of this week, on the day we'd all been hyped up to hear the big plan, the big message, the big salvation from our Prime Minister, what the public wanted to hear was a step change. They wanted to hear a commitment from the government and a plan and some action from the government about employment. Not any mention of employment in that whole speech. All we got, not a step up, all we got was tiptoeing around the issues. We're going to consider that, we're going to review that, we'll set up a committee. I think this year is going to be a competition with how many reviews and considerations and committees can be done compared to last year, because that's what last year was full of. We didn't have any step change, we just had tiptoeing. And it was confirmation, as has been speculated in this House and in the media, that there is no plan for the future of our nation from this government. No leadership from John Key and no plan. No plan to catch up with Australia. Up and down the country, the National Party paraded this. We're going to catch up with Australia. No plan to do that. No plan for growth in our nation. Does the National Party believe in growth anymore? Perhaps it doesn't. If it doesn't, happy to hear that, but there's no plan for anything, and there's certainly no plan for job creation. It was a bit like my colleague, the Member of Parliament for Wellington Central, Grant Robertson, said, it was a bit like watching TV in January. Repeat after repeat after repeat after repeat. How many times has the Kopu Bridge been opened? How many times has the Kopu Bridge been opened? It's just extraordinary that we can hear over and over and over and over again re-announcements by the same minister, sometimes re-announcements of things that actually the previous Labour-led government had introduced. Mr. Speaker, I want to have a closer look at the tax package. We had some very solid attempts by David Cunliffe today to get some answers out of Bill English, but totally unsuccessful. Bill English slid around. It was like watching someone to try and pick up mercury with chopsticks. He was just sliding all round the bowl, unable to answer any of the questions. Mr. Speaker, we know that people on lower incomes, people on benefits, people in low-wage jobs, students who are working part-time, superannuitants, people who have given more to their country than most members in this House ever will, people who are on superannuation, we know that they spend a larger proportion of their income on things they have to spend it on. They have to spend a large proportion of their income on things that attract GST. They don't have a choice. People in this House have a lot of income left over because we get very high salaries. So GST increases will hurt the lowest income earners because they have to spend a higher percentage of their income on things that they have no choice about. So they will be the most disadvantaged from the National Party's proposal to put GST up to 15%. But Bill English makes it sound like we're all going to be better off. Rubbish. That's what he's saying. Oh, no, sorry. He's implying we're all going to be better off. What he actually says is most people won't be worse off. So I'm not quite sure what most people won't be worse off means, but he is deceiving the public by not explaining that people on low incomes not only pay more on goods that will get a higher price now because they'll have a higher level of GST, but they will get nothing out of lowering the top tax rate. If the top tax rate is lowered, as was floated in John Key's speech, people who earn less than $48,000 a year, and that is a lot of people in New Zealand, will get not 1 cent. Lowering the top tax rate will not give them 1 cent. And if they haven't got children, and if they're not on a benefit, and they're not a superannuitant, how will they have that increased GST compensated for? There has been no compensation at all for that. If the top tax rate is cut, John Key will get $509 a week. Paul Reynolds, and I'm not having a go at him personally, anyone else who's in Paul Reynolds' position will get over $2,500 a week. Mr. Speaker, who needs more money in their pocket? Does somebody who's on a pension, somebody who's on a benefit, a student who's working part-time trying to put themselves through university or Polytech? Who needs more money, Mr. Speaker? Somebody who's on $48,000 or less, or somebody who is on $250,000. The National Party is proposing to make the lowest income earners pay more in GST, and the highest income earners will get the biggest in the tax cuts. Mr. Speaker, before my time concludes, I just want to make some comments about the other broken promises that we've had confirmed this week. In addition to the broken promise on GST, we've also had confirmed in the House today the broken promise on cuts in frontline health services. This is the National Party policy, which says less bureaucracy, more frontline care for patients. But day after day after day, we are hearing the anguished cries, particularly from the most senior members in our community, about the savage health cuts that they are having to bear. An 86-year-old who can't hang out her own washing, can't change her sheets or do her cleaning, wants the dignity of remaining in her own home, got a phone call from somebody who said, "I'm ringing to see how you're doing. I'm from the health board." And then at the end of the conversation, when this woman said, "I'm doing very well, thank you for ringing," was told her home support was cut. Where is the respect for that elder person? Where is the dignity that they deserve? And where is the support that will enable that woman to stay in her own home? Her home support is what's keeping her independent and in dignity in her own home, rather than going into a rest home where she doesn't want to live, and actually which would end up costing the state more. Health cuts, charges in public hospitals, and GST increase. Mr. Speaker, that was probably the most disappointing speech that I have heard from a Prime Minister in my time in the House.
I call Chris Tremaine.
Mr